Do you expect any surprises?
I don't think so. I think, as expected, Walter Mondale probably will remain the front runner. I think from there down to 5 is up for grabs. 2, 3, 4, and 5, I think could go to any number of people. I wouldn't make any predictions in that area.
How high do you need to place in order for it to be a victory for your campaign?
Well, I've said all along that I think I have the same requirement that every other candidate does to stay in this race. Anybody who starts dropping below the top division, by that I mean the first 4 places out of a field of 8, is going to have difficulty staying in this race very long.
Good afternoon. Welcome back to the Des Moines Register in downtown Des Moines, Iowa. We continue our coverage of the Iowa caucuses and the presidential campaigns. Joining us for the next hour, Senator George McGovern, a Democrat from South Dakota originally, and he'll be with us for the next hour discussing the issues involved in these caucuses, talking about Iowa politics and also the presidential elections. Throughout this hour, as usual, our phone lines will be open for viewers in all areas of the country. For those of you in Eastern and Central time zones, 515-246-9933, and in Pacific and Mountain time zones, 246-9922. Now, in 1972, the last time you were in these caucuses, you came in second to Ed Muskie. Any comparisons between 72 and 84?
Well, yes, there are a number of sharp differences. In 1972, people didn't know much about the Iowa caucuses. As a matter of fact, there wasn't a great deal of interest in them. Ed Muskie and I together probably spent a total of 6 days in the Iowa caucuses before the vote came. That's in contrast to this time, when I alone have spent 40 days working the state of Iowa, contacting people all over the state. So there's much greater national focus and vastly greater national interest in these Iowa caucuses than there was 12 years ago.
Now, there's a lot of last-minute politicking going on, as you might imagine, one day before the Iowa caucuses. This is the inside of the Des Moines Register today, and it's a full-page ad paid for by the McGovern for President campaign. It says, "Don't throw away your conscience." George McGovern, what do you mean by that?
I mean by that even those voters who may think that I am not going to be the nominee, if they agree with the positions I've taken, if they think that my recommendation for a 25% cut in military spending is right, if they think my recommendation to get those troops out of Lebanon right now, which I've been recommending for months, is right, if they believe in rebuilding the nation's railways, if they believe in a strong price support program for American agriculture with a good conservation program, then they should vote for George McGovern. I'm the one that's taken those positions. And even if somebody else turns out to be the nominee, if people stay with their conscience, that believe in what I believe, that's going to have an impact on that nominee, no matter who it is, whether it's me or somebody else.
So if you get a substantial amount of the vote tomorrow, then you think that might change Walter Mondale, whoever the winner is, mind on a few issues and come closer to the way you think? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I think. If George McGovern were to come in a strong second here in Iowa tomorrow night, that means that a lot of Iowans want that military fat, military waste, and boondoggling cut out of the military budget. It means they want a fair tax structure, a strong farm program, all those things that I've been campaigning on all over this state. I think better than any other candidates, I have spelled out my positions very sharply and very clearly. It's a 10-point program. Anyone can understand it. It's a program that's based on the concepts of peace and justice. And those issues, I think a good many Iowans would like to see reinforced tomorrow night in that vote. The best way they can do that is to cast a vote for George McGovern, whether I turn out to be the nominee or somebody else does.
What does it cost to run a full-page ad like the one we just showed our viewers?
About $10,000 for a full-page ad like that, but you're probably reaching several 100,000 people. It's a lot cheaper than traveling around the state by automobile or by car trying to see everybody.
Phone lines are open for viewers in all areas of the country. Our guest, George McGovern, and he's with us for the next hour live here just off the newsroom floor of the Des Moines Register, talking politics. Phone lines are open. Feel free to give us a call if you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make. What do you think is there going to be one main issue or one overriding issue you think in this campaign?
I think the fear of war, the fear of deepening involvement in places like Lebanon and Central America, the breakdown of arms understanding with the Soviets, the collapse of the arms negotiations, the possibility even of a major conflict with the Soviet Union if we continue on this present course, the Reagan course, is going to be the #1 issue in 1984.
There's a lot of talk about the women's vote this time around, a lot of talk about whether or not the Democrats should have a female vice presidential candidate. How important is it for women that they have a female vice presidential candidate?
I don't think to women it's all that important. I think they realize this is a kind of a symbolical gesture. It's a kind of tokenism. Personally, what women are interested in, I think, is equal pay or comparable pay for comparable work. They don't want discrimination in the workplace. They want a fair break on pensions, on Social Security, on IRA accounts. They want equal rights. They want to be treated as the equal of men, which they should be. They're human beings, equally precious in the eyes of God. They ought to have full equal rights. I don't think they're going to be fooled by somebody who says that you can forget about those things but please the women simply by putting one of them on the ticket with some man to run for the vice presidency.
We had Roxanne Conlon on last evening, who was the Democratic gubernatorial nominee in 1982 for governor of this state. And we had one of our callers call up and suggest that a McGovern-Conlon ticket would be a good one. Would you consider something like Roxanne Conlon as a VP candidate?
I think we could win. I think it'd be a great ticket. I haven't discussed it with Roxanne, but she's a brilliant woman, well known here in Iowa. I regret very much she wasn't elected governor here in Iowa, but there are a lot of able women. Roxanne Conlon is one of them.
Let's go to the phone. Seattle, Washington, you're a first caller. Go ahead, please.
Yes, when McGovern ran for president in '72, he suggested, I think at that time, that to take care of welfare, they mail everybody a check, you know, and what, like the minimum amount they would need. And at the time, I laughed so hard I almost cried. But so many years later, the welfare mess the way it is, I think it's probably the only way we could solve that problem. Because the way it is now, if you get on welfare and with all your payments and that, then you decide to get a part-time job and earn $200 a month or something. They say, well, we got to reduce welfare that much. In other words, in essence, saying, hey, we got to keep you on welfare. And then, in other words, you can get on the welfare, it's hard to get out. And as more get in and can't get out, it seems like the politicians, both sides, have built something that's real bad, and it favors the Democrats because if the Republicans try and turn this around, the Democrats say, hey, you got to vote for us, you can keep getting welfare payments. And I think the original now is the only solution there is send a check to the rich, the poor, and everybody. And if you want to survive on that, okay, but if you want to earn more, that's your business, and everybody can work their way out and earn more and be taxpayers. But that's my comment. Now, go ahead, I'll turn it over to Mr.
Thank you, Seattle.
Well, that was the whole idea behind that 1972 proposal of mine. You're quite right that it was ridiculed at the time, but it actually makes a lot of sense. What I was proposing was a $1,000 minimum payment to everyone. Obviously, in the case of high-income people, that would be taxed back. In the case of those in the middle, they'd keep part of it would go back in the form of taxes. In the case of those dependent children, old people unable to work, those who are afflicted or handicapped who are unable to work, this would be a form of public assistance. It would have eliminated the whole welfare bureaucracy. You wouldn't have needed millions of people working in the welfare field because the whole thing would have been handled through the Internal Revenue Service, just like we collect taxes. I might say to my friend who's just called in here that we all presently get a $1,000 personal income tax exemption now. Everybody gets that, every man, woman, and child in the United States. What I was proposing was a $1,000 tax credit to replace the $1,000 income tax exemption. In this way, you would have been benefiting the people at the bottom more than high-income people who now get the principal benefit from the present system.
Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Good afternoon, and you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Let me first say that I stand completely behind George McGovern. I think that his stand on the issues has been one that he has proven for all of his years in Congress, and I think that he has more than spoken well for the American people. And coming from a rural state, as Senator McGovern does, I can completely agree with his background. I've read his autobiography, Grassroots, and I've seen him in person. I think he's a great man. He's certainly probably my biggest American hero in American politics.
Chapel Hill, let me ask you, what do you think of the senator from the state next door to yours, Senator Fritz Hollings?
Well, when Hollings first started his campaign, I kind of wrote him off as a normal conservative Southern Democrat. Mm-hmm. But I think that a lot of his ideas are quite good, and let me merely state that when he stood behind George McGovern in the recent debate, I think at Dartmouth College, against when Donahue was questioning McGovern's character, Fritz Hollings rose in my esteem completely.
All right, do you have a question for George McGovern?
Yes, the other day I was talking with a woman on campus. I go to the University of North Carolina, and we were talking about the Vietnam War and George McGovern's role as a dissenter in that war. And she took the cynical viewpoint that George McGovern stood solely for American interests in that war, and that he was not really concerned with third world issues and with all the Vietnamese lives that were wasted in that war. Let me merely ask Senator McGovern what role should concern for third world issues, in effect, what role should third world morality play in American foreign policy?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the kind words of support that you spoke about me. I might say I love your state. I think North Carolina is one of the really beautiful garden spots of the world. With regard to the woman that you mentioned, she's totally uninformed about my role in the Vietnam conflict, because I not only protested American involvement because of what it was doing to our own country, the damage, the loss of our young people, the billions of dollars we threw away on that foolish venture, but I objected to it because we were destroying that little country of Vietnam. We dropped more bombs on little Vietnam during the Vietnam War than we did in all the world during the Second World War, when I was a heavy bombardment pilot in that war. I know something about aerial bombardment, and we devastated large areas of not only Vietnam, but of Cambodia and Laos. It was one of the great tragedies of the war that so much destruction took place. So, of course, as an American, my first concern was about the death of young Americans, but I was deeply concerned, and said so time after time after time, about the destruction of the life of these people in that little country. I'm deeply concerned about the people in the third world, their hunger, their pain, their desire to break out from under the exploitative arrangements that has held them all these years. I think the United States does have to take a more constructive and more patient attitude towards these revolutionary movements in the third world.
Albuquerque, New Mexico, good afternoon, and you're on the air with George McGovern. Go ahead, please.
Hello, George.
Yes.
I don't know much about this thing, but I know they're giving the president going over about these deficits. Well, now, how in the world did you, in all them years, your $1 billion in debt, how in the world did you get through all that, making that debt without making a deficit? And would you explain to me what's the difference between a debt and a deficit? It's all owed money, isn't it, or not? Explain it.
Yeah, it's a good question. The deficit is the annual difference between what we collect and what we spend. At the present time, that annual deficit for this past year was $200 billion. In other words, we spent $200 billion more than we took in 1983. Apparently, the same thing is going to happen again in 1984. The national debt is, of course, what has accumulated ever since the beginning of the country. And we're told that in the first 4 years of the Reagan administration, if we continue on this present course, we will have added enough to the national debt so that it is 40% of the entire total that's been accumulated ever since George Washington. This is why people are especially targeting the deficit now. I suppose there's another reason why President Reagan has been especially criticized, in that he not only has the biggest annual deficits running each year that we've ever had in American history, but he is the president who campaigned 4 years ago on a pledge to balance the budget. So that makes him doubly subject to criticism.
We've been here all this week covering the build-up to the Iowa caucuses, and this afternoon joining us is George McGovern for this call-in program. If you've been enjoying our coverage of these campaigns, you can thank Heritage Cable of Iowa for that. They've done a great deal for us, and we certainly appreciate the help they've offered us this week. Next call is from Des Moines, Iowa. Good afternoon. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
I was calling as it was a dual question, and my first question is on education. And Iowa has one of the finest education systems, and my question was, we have heard a lot about the Head Start program, but what are your feelings on more money for the talented and gifted? My second question is on the refurbishing of the American railroad system, the freight and more particularly Amtrak.
All right. Thanks for the call, Des Moines.
I agree with the caller about the Iowa educational system. It's one of the 2 or 3 best out of the 50 states. The Iowa educational level among its people is up there near the top, if not first, very close to the top. On the matter of special programs for the talented and the gifted, by all means, this group of talented young people represent one of the richest resources this country has. And just as we spell out special programs and the money to support them for handicapped children, we need special programs with special funding for those who have unusual talent or academic ability. The question on the railways, I believe that we ought to have a federal commission look at the whole question of the railways in the United States. Those that are doing well, that are making a profit, leave them alone. In those areas where private enterprise can't function profitably in the rail business, if you need railways, I think the federal government ought to make a commitment over the next 16 years before the end of this century that by the year 2000 we will have built as good a railway system as exists anywhere on the face of this earth. It would be one of the great investments we could make, and I'd recommend we use our the money that's now targeted for the MX missile and the B-1 bomber to put into building a first-rate railway system.
Rockford, Michigan. Good afternoon. You're on the air with George McGovern. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I would like to know what Mr. McGovern's position is on the space program as far as peaceful planetary exploration, another mission to Mars or Titan.
Okay, Rockford, before he answers, can I ask you who you're going to support in 1984?
Undecided yet.
Undecided, all right.
I couldn't hear that question.
Wants to know your stand on space and the peaceful exploration of space.
I think it's fine. I support the space program. I'm not sure that the President's proposal for a manned space platform ought to be the highest priority. I don't want to take exception to that just yet, because I frankly don't have enough technical information to make a judgment on it. The only thing I can tell you today is that I support the peaceful uses of outer space exploration and of the space program, and I would continue to advance and sustain that program.
Do you think Americans are willing to pay for an $8 billion space station like the President has proposed?
I'm not sure. I frankly am not. I'm not avoiding the question. I just think it's a highly complicated matter. I'm not a space expert. You can't be a space expert. You can't be an expert in everything. Space is one of the things where I don't claim expertise. I suppose John Glenn is the expert among the 8 Democratic contenders in that area. But if I should become president, one of the things I would do would be to talk to the people who are the experts, who are the authorities, and try to evaluate whether that $8 billion space platform is the best thing we could do with the money. It may be. I'm not condemning it.
Messina, New York, thanks for waiting, and you're on the air with George McGovern. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Senator McGovern, I would just like to say that I support your campaign totally, and I'm calling from upstate New York in St. Lawrence County, the 26th Congressional District. I'm running as a delegate for you to the National Convention.
Good for you.
And the people are very receptive to our campaign up here in New York, and I see things picking up more and more all the time. I'd just like to stress to the people is now is the time to join our campaign, not after we win Iowa or win New Hampshire, but they have to join now and, send in the money, send in the contributions, because, the campaign definitely needs as much money as we can to fight the organization of Walter Mondale.
Messina, New York, let me ask you, George McGovern is very low in the polls. Isn't it frustrating working for a candidate who has very little chance of winning?
No, it's not, because when you know you're right and you know the campaign is right, it's a people's campaign, you've got to give it all you have, 24 hours a day. And
okay.
I would just like to have Senator McGovern respond to a couple things here. First, I would like him to state here for all the people, there are skeptics out there, that he is totally committed to staying all the way to the convention in July in San Francisco. I would also like him to talk a little bit about how the convention is going to be different this year, 1984 rather than 1980. This year there's going to be an open convention. I think each candidate is going to have a much more influential role, especially like you had said in the Iowa debate.
Okay, New York, let's get the Senator's response. Thanks for your two questions.
On the first question, yes, I intend to stay the course. I think we are going to do well in Iowa. I might say at this time 12 years ago I was at 4% in the polls. A week later the Iowa caucuses gave me 22% and I came in second here in Iowa. So where you stand in the polls today is of no consequence. It's where you stand tomorrow after this first caucus in Iowa that is significant. I think we're going to do very well here. I think we'll do well in New Hampshire the following week, and we'll do very well 2 weeks later in Massachusetts. So I do expect to gather the momentum and the contributions that will enable me to go all the way to San Francisco to the convention. I appreciate your telling the audience we need money. I'm not sure I'm allowed to make a fund appeal on this program, but I'll just agree that we need money very badly. With regard to the convention, it is going to be an open convention as contrasted to 1980 where the delegates were committed and pledged and were unable to change at the convention. I think this gives a little more flexibility and a little more opportunity for a candidate who might go there without a majority of the delegates to still emerge as the nominee.
Let's go out to the side of the 1984 Democratic National Convention. San Francisco, you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Hi, yes, I was just calling to ask Senator McGovern if he receives the Democratic presidential nomination, will he ask Jesse Jackson to be his running mate?
Well, Jesse's one that ought to be considered, frankly. I think all 7 of these other contenders that I'm running with ought to be considered. I obviously haven't made any decision as to who my running mate would be. I'm a long ways at this stage from getting the nomination. But as I move towards that nomination, if I'm one of the major contenders 6 months down the road, you can be very sure that I'll start thinking about a running mate well ahead of time. It might be a black person like Jesse Jackson. It might be a woman. It might be one of these other men that's running with me for the nomination. There are any number of good candidates that I would consider.
San Francisco, have you decided who you're going to support?
No, I haven't yet.
Okay. San Francisco, thanks for the call. Senator, when you began your campaign in 1983, you made it very clear that members of your family weren't wholeheartedly behind your decision to go into it, that your wife was still a little hesitant about it. How does your family stand now on your campaign?
They're all here in Iowa right now, campaigning hard. They, frankly, when I say they, I would say that maybe 3 out of the 6. I have 4 daughters and 1 son and 1 wife. And out of those 6 people, it was about 3 to 3 as to whether I should get into this race or not. My wife was afraid I would get hurt. She was afraid I'd be disappointed again as I was in '72. Some of my daughters felt the same way. But I can tell you, once I made the decision to go into it, every one of them got into this campaign, and they're all working in various parts of the country.
Berman County, New Jersey, you're on the air with Senator George McGovern. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi, George McGovern. How are you?
Fine.
Good. Well, first I want to tell you that in 1972 I had the privilege of voting for you, and that's probably about the best vote I cast in the last 10 years.
Thank you.
And I also figure that August 9th, 1974, you'd have won by a landslide, so maybe there's still some of that left over. Let me just ask you one quick question. Tax reform. Can you explain to us out here how you feel about tax reform, and moreover, would tax reform eliminate the budget deficit that the President is talking about? And thanks a whole bunch for being on today.
Thank you, and thanks for your kind words. Yes, tax reform would help eliminate the budget deficit. I think the 1981 tax law was probably the worst one ever put on the statute books for this reason. It doesn't collect revenues fairly. It places the main burden on the middle class and lower income families, and it has all kinds of write-offs, the most complicated kind of tax shelters and loopholes. If you make enough money to be able to afford high-priced tax lawyers and accounting firms and things of that kind, you can probably avoid paying very much in the way of taxes. General Electric, for example, made $1.6 billion in 1981. They didn't pay a nickel in federal income taxes. They even recovered $100 million they had paid in previous years. Now, that's just not fair. We need something like the Bradley-Gephardt bill. I notice you're from New Jersey. Senator Bradley of New Jersey has a bill that would repeal most of these loopholes in the tax laws that are permitting the rich to avoid taxes. And it would then lower the maximum tax rate for all of us to not more than 30%. Nobody, no corporation, no individual would pay more than 30%. Senator Bradley believes, and I do too, that that would not only collect revenue more efficiently, but it would provide a fair tax. People would accept that they were being taxed fairly, and on that basis you could probably put through a modest tax increase that would help bring down this deficit. In any event, I strongly support the Bradley-Gephardt fair tax bill.
Los Angeles, California. Have you decided who you're going to support for president in 1984?
No.
Okay.
I'd like to talk to Senator McGovern.
Go ahead.
First of all, Senator, I like you personally very, very much.
Thank you.
Ray Bradbury, though, once said of you, and I do agree with him, that you don't have any imagination. But I am surprised at your change in position on the space program. I'm very surprised. Because you fought like the devil to kill the shuttle. And for those who hate the space shuttle, that's our ticket to peace. Verification of our, arms control agreements are vital because of that vehicle. We have to have overflights in the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Another reason that I am surprised is that one of the benefits of the space program is for every dollar we've spent, we've got 7 to 14 back in our national economy. NASA created the telecommunications revolution, created all these new industries that we're going to be dependent on into the 21st century. And one thing that I'm particularly interested in is that later this year on board the shuttle, there's an experiment with the electrophoresis unit to produce beta cells. If that proves out, we will have a cure for diabetes. You realize how much that will save this country?
All right, Los Angeles, let's give the senator a chance to respond.
Yeah.
You've got two good questions there.
Yeah.
Thanks for the call.
Yeah. First of all, let me say to you and your friend Ray Bradbury, I think I have an ample supply of imagination, at least as much as Ray Bradbury has. I think I know who he is, and I think my imagination will equal his in the best sense of that word. With regard to your statement about me flipping on the space program, I've always supported the space program. I may not support some individual parts of it. I'm not sure that I support President Reagan's proposal for a manned space platform. I may support it. I want to know more about it. I'm not an expert, as you apparently are, on the space program. But I would talk to people who do have expert knowledge in that area and try to arrive at what I thought was a sensible program. With regard to these other byproducts that come from the space program, I'm aware that we've had a lot of helpful byproducts. It may be that the space shuttle program, now that we've gone ahead with it and it's been funded, ought to be continued and expanded. I've got an open mind on that. I went down to see the space shuttle launched here a couple of years ago. Took my grandsons with me. I was very impressed with what I saw.
Des Moines, Iowa. Good afternoon. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes. Oh, dear. The television is getting to me. I would like very much to ask the senator.
Des Moines, turn your television set all the way down, and then you won't have that echo.
All right, just a moment.
Thank you. For the rest of our viewers, if you call in, it's always a good idea to turn your television set all the way down, and then you won't be distracted by the echo which the caller from Des Moines is distracted by. Des Moines, are you with us?
Yes, I am now.
Okay, go ahead.
I know your stance on military aid to Central America. I'd like to know what your administration would do about the people who have come here in fear of their lives, that the current administration calls economic refugees rather than political refugees.
Des Moines, stay on the line. I'd like to ask you a question after the answer.
I think we have to provide a haven for those people. I think they really are in danger of losing their lives if they return after having fled brutal governments like the one that now exists in El Salvador. Some of those other governments in Central America are equally bad. Guatemala has one of the rottenest governments on the face of the earth, one of the most cruel and brutal governments. Refugees from governments like that, I think this country ought to offer a haven to. Most of us here in the United States are the descendants of people who fled political, economic, and military repression abroad, and we don't want to give up that heritage.
Des Moines, Iowa, are you going to be attending a caucus Monday evening?
Sure am.
And how many people do you expect at your caucus?
I have no idea. It could range from 60, which we had in 80, down to 5, which we had in 82.
Okay. Who are you going to support in 1984?
I'm committed to John Glenn.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call. I want to remind our viewers that coming up tomorrow evening, beginning at 8 o'clock p.m. Central Time, we'll be bringing you live coverage of a caucus taking place right here in downtown Des Moines, and immediately following that, we'll bring you a much smaller caucus, which will take place in the living room in a farm about 50 miles east of Des Moines, Iowa. Live coverage of the caucuses tomorrow evening here on C-SPAN. Next call is from Phoenix, Arizona. Good afternoon, and you're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Mr. McGovern, I'm a libertarian. I voted that way in 1980, and I did that because I thought that, that was the most moral sort of a vote, since I thought the Democrats and the Republicans, they were pretty much the same on the main basic issues. I have been listening to you. I saw you on the Firing Line show with William F. Buckley, and also I saw you on the Crossfire show with Patrick Buchanan, and I thought that you handled your rhetoric very, very well. I thought you spoke very, very well.
Thank you.
My problem is this. As a libertarian, I think about things in a moral way, and I have to wonder about this democratic sort of stuff you've been talking about, and it sounds a lot socialism, like you want to raise taxes on rich people because obviously there's fewer of the rich people. They don't have that many votes.
Well, I just want them to pay their share.
Like, environment and, how regulation helps the environment and all of this. And you use deception. And I voted against you in 1972 because of that. I thought you were a good man, but you didn't understand the Soviet threat. And even today, you say that it's fair for the Soviets to set up missiles in their eastern bloc there, because the British and the French have missiles aimed on the Russians. Well, heck, Mr. McGovern, the Russians have missiles in the Soviet Union aimed on Britain and France. Why should they be allowed to have, Warsaw Pact missiles, which is what the, NATO buildup is for?
Okay, Phoenix, Arizona, that's a good question. I've got a lot of callers who are calling in, so let's give the Senator a chance to respond. Go ahead, Senator.
Let me just say with regard to the Soviet missiles, I don't want the SS-20s in the Soviet Union either. But they made a proposal that I thought we should have looked at when they said they would reduce the number of Soviet SS-20s targeted on Western Europe to the same number of British and French missiles targeted on Russia. The British and the French, as I understand it, have a 162 intermediate range missiles targeted on Soviet cities. If we could get the number of Soviet SS-20s down to 162, that might be a fair trade-off. It would mean that the NATO countries had an even balance. I think that's something that we should have explored instead of rejecting it.
What do you think of the libertarian point of view?
I don't know much about it. If this gentleman is a representative of it, he's obviously misinformed on some of my positions. He said, for example, that it's socialism to argue that the rich ought to pay taxes. Why shouldn't the rich pay taxes? The rest of us have to pay taxes. What I said here a moment ago is that the General Electric Corporation had net earnings of $1.6 billion. In 1981, they didn't pay 1 penny of taxes. Is that the libertarian point of view, that the rest of us pay taxes and these giant corporations pay nothing? I don't agree with that.
Atlanta, Georgia, you're our next caller. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.
Thank you to C-SPAN for giving me the opportunity to ask the question, and thank you, Senator, for being there.
Thank you.
My question is, I'm wondering, has anyone ever proposed a Department of Barter?
A Department of what?
A Department of Barter.
Barter?
That's barter, and what I'm suggesting very simply is freeing a whole lot of the nation's natural resources by acting as a central clearinghouse, or the government doing such.
That idea has been considered over the years. At one time, it was a part of the Public Law 480 program. You could barter American agricultural commodities for certain other things, but it proved to be so cumbersome that it never really was expanded. It's apparently easier just to trade things for currency and to use the international monetary structure rather than the direct trading of commodities.
Second call from Seattle, Washington. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd just like to, first of all, preface my question with a comment that I voted for my first presidential election in 1972. It was for Senator McGovern. It's still the best vote I've ever placed.
Thank you.
I just wanted to get that out of the way. I'd also like to say that I watched the debate from Iowa last week, and I felt that I think a lot of people perceive Senator McGovern's campaign to be just a no attempt at all, or that he has no chance, but I feel that he still articulates the issues better than any of the other candidates. He came across extremely strong, and I think his closing remarks made me feel like I did back in '72. My question is, I read in the paper today that the head of the Mondale campaign in Iowa said that if he gets over 50% of the vote, the campaign is over. I'd like to question a system that allows this to happen, where one caucus or one primary can decide the election or the entire primary campaign. I don't agree with that, and I'd like to get the senator to comment on that. Also, does he believe in any sort of a national primary?
With regard to the Mondale aid statement, I can't believe anybody can really be serious about that. Obviously, one caucus is not going to determine this nomination. I suspect some of the Mondale aides believe that since they're doing so well, apparently, in the public opinion polls here, that they can claim to have had it sewed up once this caucus is over. Nobody else believes that, and I don't think Walter Mondale believes it. I think he knows it's still a long way to that nomination in San Francisco next summer. With regard to the national primary, I do not believe in it. That would mean that everything is focused on one day. It would be an enormous handicap to everybody except the best-known front runner. A candidate would have very little opportunity to come from behind and make a good showing and become well-known. Actually, for my part, I think we have too many primaries, too many caucuses jammed into this third week, the so-called Super Tuesday on March 13th, where we have 10 states holding their primaries and caucuses on the same day. I personally object to that because a candidate can't be in 10 states on the same day. The only way you can have a presence there is through purchased television time, and that's enormously expensive.
Davenport, Iowa. Good afternoon, and you're on the air with George McGovern. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Mr. McGovern.
Hello there.
I'd like to talk to you about the unions in the Quad City area. It's very strong here as far as industrial farm industry, and it seems that they're starting to lose their touch and control of the area. It's like the large industries are kind of taking over and dropping the wages and benefits and everything else. I was wondering if, as far as nationwide, I know unions are in trouble. I'd like to know your point of view about that.
Well, I think you're right. The unions are probably weaker today and less in a position to bargain effectively than they were 10 years ago. There's been a great deal of anti-union activity across this country in recent years. The anti-union forces have mobilized. Unions are on the defensive more than at any time I can remember since I've been in public life.
This is the front page of this morning's Des Moines Register. It says up here in the headline, "Caucus Time at Last." And the cartoon, the front page editorial cartoon by Henry Duffy, has a picture of three farmers sitting on a park bench, it looks like, and one of them says, what are we going to do for fun after all these political types leave? And the other one says, same thing we've done year after year. George McGovern, is too much made of this Iowa caucus?
I don't think so, and I think the Iowa people love it. Every place I've gone in this state, people have said, welcome to Iowa. It's one of the friendliest places I've ever been. These Iowa voters are very intelligent, very sophisticated. They love politics. I think they like these politicians coming to their state. It's a pretty good industry, incidentally, here in Iowa. We fill up the hotels. We keep the filling stations busy, the newspapers, the radio, the television people. It's become one of Iowa's minor industries, having this caucus here first every 4 years.
Treasure Island, Florida, you're our next call. Go ahead, please.
I'd like to make a comment and ask the Senator a question, and that being what he intends to do about the elderly we here in St. Petersburg, Florida, who are suffering miserably from the reverse Robin Hood tactics that Reagan has produced with us. I mean, you know, the Robin Hood used to rob the rich and give it to the poor, and of course he is taking it from the elderly, he's taking it from the poor, and he's giving it to the rich with all of their tax breaks and loopholes. And here in Florida, they have cut the programs for the elderly. We're just miserable. There are people here living on Social Security, and that's all they have. And they used to be able to go to a senior citizen center and have their lunch. And now he's cut that out. He's cut out the buses that enable the disabled, the elderly, to get to the center. He's cut back miserably on all the programs here. Claude Pepper is very aware of this. And I want to know, it's important to me because my vote's going to McGovern. And I want to know what he plans to do about the misery that Reagan has doled out to we, the elderly.
Okay, Treasure Island, Florida, thanks for the call.
This is a good question. First of all, let me say that for 30 years, I have regarded Claude Pepper as one of the most best informed men we have in this country on the issues of senior citizens. He's a senior citizen himself. He's one of the oldest men in the United States Congress. But he's the person and people like him that I would turn to as President of the United States for advice on what kind of a comprehensive program we need to make life better for these older people. We need to keep in mind that one thing every single human being has in common with the others is that we're all getting older. We're all going to be old someday, at least we hope we are. We hope we'll live to be senior citizens. That means that every one of us, from the youngest to the oldest, has a vested personal interest in seeing to it that we have the kind of programs in this country that enable our older people to live those later years in dignity, with some measure of security and happiness. I regret very much that over the last 3 years, the Reagan policy has been one of cutting back on nutrition, cutting back on programs for our older people, knocking out training programs, weakening the programs for dependent children and older people. Right across the board, we've had a weakening of commitment to the most vulnerable people in our society. We're spending too much on military overkill, military boondoggles, and not enough on the conditions of life of our people.
Are we going to have to cut some entitlement programs, though, as a means of reducing the deficit?
I don't think we have to cut the entitlement programs. If we'll bring down these enormous increases in the arms race that have taken place the last 3 years, and then plug some of these huge loopholes at the top end of the income scale, we can deal with that deficit and still handle the domestic needs of our country.
Out to the Washington, D.C. area, Arlington, Virginia. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to state that I'm a former Iowa resident, so I have more than a passing interest in the Iowa caucuses. And I'd also like to state that I feel that the senatorial campaign in Iowa is one of the most important in the nation, and it is absolutely imperative that Tom Harkin be elected to the U.S. Senate. I'd like to ask Senator McGovern what he feels that the Democratic strategy should be to combat President Reagan's campaign of style over substance.
First of all, let me say I agree with this statement about Tom Harkin. He's one of the ablest men in the United States Congress today. With regard to President Reagan's placing a style over substance, all of us know, including the President's supporters as well as his critics, which I am, that this is the first time we've had a professional, veteran Hollywood actor in the White House. He uses that television screen as effectively as anyone I know. with the possible exception of the late John F. Kennedy. But he is using it, as you say, many times to promote style over substance. He sold that invasion of Grenada to the American people as a great military victory, when it was actually something entirely unnecessary that cost the lives of 18 young Marines. There's no way an ill-advised action of that kind could have been sold by to the American people except through an actor who knew what he was doing on that television screen.
You spoke of the Senate race taking place between Harkin and Jepsen in this state. When you lost your Senate seat in 1980, the Republicans gained a majority in the Senate. Are there any chances that the Democrats could regain control of the Senate in 1984?
I think there's a good chance we can do it. Men like Harkin coming into the Senate. There are other races where we have an opportunity to pick up a seat. I think it's possible that control of the Senate could pass to the Democrats in 1984. Let me just say to the woman who raised the question about style over substance, the only answer to that is for the Democrats to really take these issues head on. We can't let the president define the terms of the debate. We've got to take him head on these issues with the facts and with the best reasoning we can bring to bear on the issues.
Billings, Montana, thanks for waiting, and you're on the air with George McGovern. Go ahead, please.
Hello, George.
Hello
I worked for you in 1972, and one of the best things I've done in politics.
Thank you.
In Montana, we haven't seen a list of your 10-point program, and I would want to know, would you go over those points very briefly?
I can do it very fast, I think. Number one, terminate military operations in Central America. Number two, get out of Lebanon right now. Number three, a nuclear freeze now with a 25% cut in military spending. Number four, take the savings and put people back to work doing useful things like rebuilding our railways. Number five, a tax reform program to close the loopholes at the top of the income scale. Number six, a farm program to give farmers a decent price for what they're producing, and then use the surplus to feed the hungry both in this country and abroad. Number seven, a student loan program for those people wishing to continue higher education with the payback coming through the Internal Revenue Service. Number eight, a 10% one-time mortgage loan to help get the housing industry going and to restore the dream of family ownership, of home ownership. Number nine, the federal government takes over this burden now being carried by the states for welfare purposes, with the understanding the states would use that money to upgrade elementary and secondary education. And finally, equal rights for all Americans now, especially for that majority of Americans who happen to be women.
Houston, Texas, you're next. Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to ask Mr. McGovern, our present budget deficit is between 180 and $200 billion, and he has said in the past that he would reform the tax codes. He's talked about flat taxes and plugging loopholes, which would bring in an additional $60 billion a year, and he's talked about cutting defense expenditures 25% or $60 billion a year. Where would the other $60 to $80 billion come from to balance the budget? Because we're still looking at $60 or $80 billion after that. And I have one quick follow-up question after that, if that's okay.
All right, Houston, go ahead. Go ahead, George.
Oh, first of all, that would mean we're $120 billion better off than we are today. Instead of looking at a $200 billion deficit, we'd be looking, as the gentleman says, at about a $60 billion deficit. I don't think that remaining $60 billion is going to disappear until we get the unemployment rate down. Hopefully, by the kind of stimulus that I've talked about here today, undertaking a long-term rebuilding of the railways, upgrading our highways, our water systems, and so on, you would provide additional employment. It would cost you some money for a while in terms of these projects, but by converting unemployed people into workers, you'd begin collecting taxes there. You'd be free of the burden of unemployment compensation. We're told that 1% of unemployment costs the federal treasury $30 billion a year. So if you could bring that current 8.5% unemployment down to about 5.5%, that's another $90 billion you'd save the United States government.
Houston, I'm going to let you go because there's a lot of people on the line who'd like to talk to the senator, and we're almost out of time. Next call is Los Angeles, California. Go ahead, please.
I would like to ask Mr. McGovern, how come the Congress and the Senate and the President, when the Democrats were in control, did not close the loopholes on the high-income people? They had control and they had the ability to do it. They still have the ability to do it now, and at least bring it before the House and the Congress to do such a thing, but they don't.
I think the Democrats are almost as bad as the Republicans on tax policy. As a matter of fact, this 1981 tax law of Reagan's was passed by a Democratic Congress, a Republican Senate, and a Democratic House. I must say that I was as disgusted with some of my Democratic friends who voted for that bill as I was the Reagan people. This is a bipartisan failure on the part of this country that we have to correct. And I'm perfectly willing to put the pressure on my fellow Democrats in the Congress to try to do something about this, because they have to bear, as your question implies, some of the blame for this tax mess we're in today.
Baltimore, Maryland. Good afternoon. Have you decided who you're going to support in 1984?
Senator McGovern.
All right. Did you have a question?
Yes, I have a question. The question is, first I'd say I think he's the most honest candidate running. The question is, does Senator McGovern feel like he's getting his message across, and does he feel that he has the financial resources to be a serious candidate?
Well, that's my biggest problem. We've only raised $350,000 to date. You have to pit that against the millions of dollars that have come in from the political action committees, the various other groups that are backing some of the other candidates. I'm very hopeful that if we do well here in Iowa tomorrow, which I think we will, this will inspire a number of people who've been waiting to see how strong I was to send in some money to our campaign. Our address, incidentally, is Post Office Box 1984, the same year as the election year, Washington, D.C., and we do need help in the McGovern for President campaign.
You haven't raised enough to qualify for matching funds, have you?
We've raised enough to qualify, but we can't get by those nitpicking bureaucrats in the Federal Election Commission. We've created a real bureaucratic nightmare in the Federal Elections Commission. You've got to cross every T and dot every I just the way they want it done. They've got so many people running around there looking for little nitpicking regulations and excuses. It's almost impossible to get qualified unless you spend half the money on a big auditing firm.
But didn't the Federal Elections Commission come out of actually your campaign in 1972 in the race between you and Richard Nixon?
It came out of the abuses by Mr. Nixon, of which I was the victim. Now I'm being victimized a second time as the one of the 8 candidates who can't afford a great big powerful auditing firm to deal with all these nitpicking bureaucrats over at the FEC. I think it's just about the worst bureaucracy in the federal government.
Century City, California. You're on the air. Go ahead, please.
Yes, hello, Mr. McGovern. I called and talked to you when you were on C-SPAN about, it was on a Friday months ago.
Yes.
And we talked about Lebanon, and you said, I said I knew you wouldn't have the boys there if you were president.
Right.
And on Sunday morning, 2 days later, all those boys were killed, and I was just absolutely ill. And because I knew that you wouldn't have ever had them there. And
you remember that day I recommended taking them out.
Yes, you would have. I asked you when you would have brought them home, and you said yesterday or something like that. I mean, it was marvelous. Anyway, I want to say that I think you're the best qualified for president since John Kennedy, and I love Kennedy. And here's what I want to say is I voted for you in 72. I'm praying for you every day. And I've called every month and mentioned your name. Every month, called C-SPAN. I call all my relatives all over the country. I've got hundreds of them.
Century City, thank you very much for the phone call.
I appreciate
that supporter out there.
Well, let me just say that I do remember that conversation. I told this marvelous woman some weeks ago that if I were president of the United States, I never would have put the Marines in Lebanon in the first place. And way last summer, I began urging that those Marines be taken out of there. If that advice had been listened to, 264 wonderful young Marines who are now dead would have been back here safe and sound in the United States.
Last call of the hour is from San Antonio, Texas, and you're on the air with George McGovern. Go ahead, please.
Mr. McGovern?
Yes.
Let me turn my TV down, please.
We're almost out of time, San Antonio.
Okay. Yes, I spent many years in Europe doing the military.
I
noticed that they have the national health insurance there.
Yes.
And that is an employee contribution type program.
Yes.
And that our U.S. government through the military is one of the largest single employers there. And since we support that program, why do we drag our feet so on the national health insurance in the United States?
I think we'll have it someday in this country. Right now, probably the best we can do with a $200 billion deficit is to strengthen the Medicare program to provide medical care for our older people, and then strengthen that Medicaid program for low-income families. We probably don't have the political and budget support right now for national health insurance.
How much of the state have you visited in this campaign?
I've been in probably 125 different towns in the last 40 days here in Iowa. I've talked to literally thousands of farmers, small business people, students, housewives, nurses. I can't tell you how many tens of thousands of people I've met with over the last few months here in Iowa.
Are you tired of shaking hands?
Well, there are days when you get a little weary of it, but it's still a warm contact with another human being, and by and large, it's a good thing to do. It brings you closer to the people.
Now, will you stay in Iowa through caucus night, and then go to New Hampshire?
I'll be here until Tuesday morning, and then I zip right up to New Hampshire for 8 days, then 2 weeks in Massachusetts.
And where for there?
Then we see where we go. I suppose Illinois, I believe that comes in on March 20th, so we'll probably go from Massachusetts to Illinois.
And do you have the funds at this point to continue your campaign beyond that?
We have enough money to keep going, but we've got to get additional funds, or we'll run out sometime here in the next couple of weeks. The money has to begin flowing in if we're going to make it.
Our guest for the last hour has been George McGovern. He ran for president in '72. He's running again, and he'll be actively campaigning for the caucuses tomorrow evening. And a reminder, tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock Central Time, p.m., you can watch a live caucus here on C-SPAN. Senator George McGovern, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
To all of our viewers, thanks for watching, and thanks for calling, and have a nice day.